Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I am going to be reading some of the favorite books of Jerry from ONYX pages. I'm really excited to be doing this video because Jerry has such amazing taste, such amazing recommendations. Ever since I've gotten involved with her channel, followed it, I've found so many new material, new authors I never heard of, and she's encouraged me to read in areas that I have not in the past, and I love her for it. Also, she's just so energetic and just so much fun to watch. I also must say that she is one of the most interactive people that I follow, and I appreciate that. As I approach my 1 year mark here on BookTube in January, I see my BookTube taste changing, not my reading taste per se, but like what I like to watch. There are still a couple big booktubers I like watching, but I found myself overwhelmingly gravitate towards the smaller booktubers who I feel like I have more relationship with, people I can converse with either by video or in the chats of their videos, and her channel is a perfect example of that. And I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. I feel like anybody who watches me probably watches her. If not, you should. This video right here, this themed video, if you haven't been on my channel before, this is something I've done several times now. I'll pick a booktuber who I like and I'll read some of their favorite books. Usually it's because I think I'm going to like those books. Sometimes it's just to say, hey, I love your content, thank you. In the past, what I'll do is it's basically just a themed reading vlog where I'll pick some books and then I'll read them. But I'm going to be doing this video a little special because normally I try to do this like in a week's time. But I know Jerry, she is very much about slow reading and slowly consuming these books, consuming books in general, I mean. And I know her response to sometimes when I say how fast I read or how quickly I'll push through a book, it's a response for sure. And I appreciate that she has a different approach. And since this is in honor of her, I am of course going to be framing this vlog differently. I'm going to be doing this over the course of the entire month, where my goal is to read one book of 4 every week and basically take my time with each and do a slow reading process where every book I'm reading is going to be interlaced with the rest of my reading this month. And throughout the process, I'll update you as I'm reading this and maybe show you a few excerpts of what I'm doing while I'm reading. Now, 2 of these books are audio and 2 are not. Now, I'm still going to be listening above 1 point speed, but I'm going to try and slow down when I get to these audiobooks so that I can make sure I am taking it in. I'm also not going to hesitate to pause and maybe take notes occasionally, but these 2, which I'll point out in a second what they are, I will be reading slowly by eyes without any audio, without any help. So it's going to be a slow process, but I intentionally chose these 2 because I know they're very small and they should be doable in a week's time. So without further ado, the books I chose are almost entirely from her top books of 2019. In fact, I chose the top 2 books, which incidentally were short story collections that she has from her top whatever books of 2019. And then I added one more book because there was an author who I know, I believe, is her favorite author, which is Neil Hopkinson, an author who I've never read, someone who seems, when I've heard, to be like on par with N.K. Jemisin or Octavia Butler, and I need her. I need her material now. So I did went ahead and add in one of her books as well. So let's just go ahead and go through it. First, let's talk about the top 2 books of 2019 for Jerry, and that is going to be Two Moons, short stories by Crystal A. Smith. I just know that apparently it's themed around the moon. He's just queer and I believe lesbian, like queer, lesbian, black writing, and I think it'll be a really fascinating and fun read. So I'm excited to get to this small but beautiful little book. In the same vein, we have Love Beyond Space and Time, an indigenous LGBT sci-fi anthology, a set of short stories, even thinner than that one, and I have the same feelings about this one. I don't really know much about these books outside of that, but they're definitely the genre that I think I should enjoy. There's nothing about these books that are outside of my comfort zone, so I do feel very good about these books going in there. Next is going to be The Deep by River Solomon, and this is a book that I have wanted to read for so long, and I'm so excited to be getting to this, and I'm really glad that it's going to be for this type of video where I have a reason to stop and slowly try and push through this, really slower than I normally would, to really appreciate the dense material that I've heard is in here. I will mention this is not her top like 3rd book. It was more like top 10, and I chose this because it was on my shelf and I wanted to read it. I didn't want to buy too many new books for this, so that's that. Now, for the last book, the Nato Hopkins book is going to be Falling in Love with Hominids, and this one Also, incidentally, it's a short story collection of horror, sci-fi. So I'm excited to get some horror in my life here. I don't know much more about it outside of that. The reason I chose this one in particular isn't because I've heard that it's her and Jerry's favorite, but just because I've now bought all of this author's books, but this was the only one I bought brand new and had in Canada. The rest I've bought from a store in the States, and so they're now at my sister's house waiting for me to pick up. So we're starting here for this reason. Which one am I reading first? Good question. Well, I would like to do some randomization with a quantum number generator, but for now I have a strict schedule to keep to, and it's going to be starting with Naylor Hopkinson's Falling in Love with Hominids, and that is because I have a busy couple of weeks at the beginning of December, and I do not have a lot of time to sit down and read, especially this week. And I'm starting to study. It's Wednesday, we're in the middle of the week, and we're like 3 days in or 2 days in now to December. So I wanted to start this sooner, but I didn't have time. I've been busy with school. So I feel like this would be easier for me because I have more ways of reading and finding time to read via audio, which is why I say I'm not just going to sit down and read through it by eye, because I need to accommodate. However, I am going to try and stop and make a note for every short story. There are quite a few in this very thin collection, but I don't think it should be too bad, and I think it could be a lot of fun. And the real question is, how much do I talk about the stories? Because my goal is to stop and think about each one. When I'm done with them, the question then is, how much do you want to hear? I will consider that as we approach it. So I am here introducing you to this vlog because I am about to start reading this tonight, I think. Today is the 2nd or 3rd of December. It just snowed over the weekend. It's pretty bad, and we're getting to the point where the temperatures are going to start staying below 0 Celsius, so the snow's not going to melt. But it has melted today, and while it is pitch black right now at night, I do want to venture out and see what the bike path looks like, because even if it isn't doable now, it's not going to get any better for months now. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to enjoy this. I feel like it'd be a good way to start the vlog, doing two things I love, biking and reading. I also feel like I haven't been biking in like a month, and because that's also true. It got colder, and I was like, no thank you. Normally I accommodate my head for that, but it all happened so quick. Okay, I will catch you later. This intro has been super long, but I'm excited, and hopefully it shows. Okay, so as you can see, the bike path is like not really made for my bike. I have a road bike and it's not really made for this, so I don't really feel comfortable while biking. I'm going to keep going a bit, basically as far as I could to keep walking. In any case, I finished the first short story of Falling in Love with Hominids or something like that, and it was good. I enjoyed it. From the get-go of the story, I realized several things that I loved. The writing style, absolutely my taste. Dystopian-esque setting is exactly my taste, and the narrator is Bonnie Turpin, one of my favorites, probably my top 5, if not higher, audiobook narrators. So that makes this book all the better. Was the story 5-star? I feel like if it's 5-star, it should be more definitive. So I think I'm feeling like I'm going to level on 4.5. The story, for the most part, was like, this is interesting, but where is it going? And I'm actually thinking maybe it should just be 4 stars. Yeah, it's just 4 stars. I liked it, solid story, but there was nothing special as far as stories, so 4-star. Doesn't mean the book can't be 5-star. If I get an average rating of above 4.5, I'll do that. But this is just my first impression. I don't know if I'll rate every book in front of you, but I also can't write down my notes here, so these are my thoughts. Solid story. Well, anyways, that's where I'm at. I'm going to keep listening and going forward. There's not really much more I can go. At least I got out and tried. Catch you later. Hey, so I'm very behind in this goal, which was like to read 1 book a week, but that's okay. I think I'll just probably end up reading slowly for a longer period of time at once. So I'm finding this book harder to get through. I'm actually really enjoying it. I think there was one story that I thought was so short that I couldn't get into it. It's like 3 stars, but the rest are really good, and some I absolutely loved. I just read Old Habits, which was basically a after death type story, and I absolutely loved it. It was dark as fuck, and I lived for that. And I loved how it wasn't really as like, I didn't expect it to be that dark. So this book is really, it's proving to be really good. I'm just taking my time because the way I'm doing this is I'm reading it, and then I will stop and I'll make some notes, and I'll put my notes in the book after each story. The problem is when I listen to audiobooks, I tend to listen in long bursts while I do other things, and it's difficult, especially like when I'm usually cooking or cleaning, my hands are dirty or wet. It's hard to go from making notes and handling a book and then going back to do that. So I'm finding it very difficult to basically finish a story and then continuing it on. So what I'm doing instead is like I'm getting to it like once every so often, and it just means I'm going through it much more slowly. I'm nearly halfway. I'll finish this weekend for sure, and I'm going to try and maybe pick up another book and maybe just do slow reading for like a longer series of days instead of trying to fit in between other books. I've also just been reading other books, and I'm finding it difficult to read multiple books at once, which is something I say I do. But what I really do is I'll start a book and then put it down and start another book and read it for a big chunk of time and then go to the other book. So I'm not really good at literally reading side by side, you know what I mean? Like multiple books in a day throughout multiple weeks. So I'm finding it difficult, which is fine. I mean, this is a different template of a vlog here. I'm just, I guess, discovering my approaches to reading. That said, I mean, I can't tell you everything that happened in all these stories, but I could go to these little notes and review it and then probably get a trigger to remember what's going on. So it's probably just a solid collection. And I'm loving the writing and loving the variety of genres that we're dealing with. So it's really good. The other short stories I think will be easier because they are not audio, which means I'm already going to be sitting down anyway, so it's just a matter of being focused for that period of time. And they're so short, I think it should be okay. And really, this goal was to read these in December, but I mean, there's no real restriction for this not to just keep going indefinitely until I finish it, because this is a high priority set of books. I'll carry them over if I have to in January. But I just wanted to update you and let you know because, you know, not much has happened. I know you can't tell because this immediately cut through, but I did want to stop and give some thoughts while I was still in the middle of this. And I'll catch y'all next time, maybe in a few days. So we are past Christmas now. I have yet to keep up with my plans. I'm beginning to think maybe if I'm going to do this sort of ongoing vlog, maybe I just shouldn't try to update you on time. That way you won't know if I'm falling behind. But nevertheless, I'm making progress. I am nearly done with this. I have, I think, one story left. It's about an hour long. I'm going to read it tomorrow because it's really late on a Sunday after Christmas. I don't want to give you all my thoughts just yet, but what I'll say is that this is a solid collection with some seriously amazing stories and some good stories. I don't think it's going to be fast stars for me, but I do think that there's a lot to talk about with this that I can't wait to do. This is taking me so long, and for the reasons I've already given you, but you know what, it's giving me a chance to stop and make sure I let each story marinate. And there are a lot of short stories because some of these short stories are actually very short, which I have more commentary on that later. But I was getting kind of tired of reading just that and decided to go ahead and pick up the next couple of stuff. I started The Deep. It started snowing, finally, like seriously snowed after Christmas, or on Christmas actually. So decided to listen to this while I did some shoveling, and I've made it to the first chapter or so. I am listening to this, I want to say like 30 or 35% slower than I normally would. So that's how I'm going to be approaching this with sort of my slow read, trying to really take my time to let it make sure I understand, which I didn't mention before, but with the Falling in Love with Hominids, some of those stories I've listened to several times, particularly this really short ones that I have trouble sort of connecting with the quote we're supposed to take away from those really short ones. But The Deep is the one that I think will be most likely to fall into the quick read. I don't want to do it too quickly, but because it's a one cohesive story, it'll be easier for me just to listen and get through it. But I do think I can already tell that all the commentary I've heard about it up to now has helped me, I think, recognize details or references or sort of commentary from the author or authors that I'm not sure I would have recognized otherwise as a white man, basically. And if you don't know what this is about, it's essentially following these mermaids who are essentially descended from slaves who were thrown overboard during the time of the slave trade. And it follows one particular person who is responsible for holding all of the memories of their people's history. And it's about, so far it seems to be focusing on her struggles and trying to be the one responsible. So I couldn't help but compare it to sort of the Chosen Ones, but it's also some similarities here with her and Buffy. I know this is much bigger than, obviously, she's not referencing Buffy here. I thought about other things like that, like something like Buffy, where you have this Chosen One who's chosen by her people to be the one responsible to take on this burden, when in all accounts, this isn't her responsibility. Why should this one girl be responsible to hold all this weight? If you're familiar with Buffy, I think you can be familiar with the basic concept here. Not that it's that hard to sort of recognize, but I do like the ability to sort of see those connections, and so far it's a great story. It's powerful stories. Then I also started Two Moons stories by Crystal A. Smith, and why I wasn't actually planning on starting this. I was just on the phone with my sister, and I like to pick up books and start reading to her and see how long I can get through it before she makes me stop. And she didn't stop me, so I got to the first whole story, and it was different. I want to say it was sort of abstract artsy, so I may end up rereading it because I'm not sure how I felt. I definitely liked it. I am worried about my ability to really appreciate everything she's trying to say. That said, the first story wasn't very long, so I may just go back and reread it before I move on, but it's also short. My goal is to finish this before Friday, because we're on Sunday now. Well, technically it's Monday morning, but Sunday night. I want to finish it before the new year, because I already have my January and February TBR set up, and I don't want to sort of sabotage that, but I will if I have to. So I'm going to use this week as a motivator to push through these. These are my priority books now. I know I said the goal was to read one a week. Obviously, that's not working out. Clearly, this approach isn't working for me, but that doesn't mean I can't still read these slowly. I think the audiobooks were the hardest part of sort of pacing myself with, and given the fact that the deep is so short and I'm already listening to it at a slower speed, I do think I'll be able to sort of slowly get through that in the span of 1 week, and simultaneously also get through these stories. I mean, I'm a slow reader. I don't plan on using my Kindle like I normally would to sort of speed through it. I will just be reading it by hand and try to make notes at the end of each chapter like I did with Falling in Love with Hominids. I believe, though, since it's so short, this one and the other one, that I should be able to finish them by Friday if I'm persistent. I do need to start working eventually, because obviously Christmas is over, but I don't have as much to do, and it technically still is the holidays, so I will, again, should be okay with reading these stories. But that's my goal. Use this last week, this last stretch, to sort of get through my TBR before the new year starts. But I am behind in this vlog, but I don't feel bad about it, just because it's not as if there's like a time deadline here, besides my TBRs, obviously. So on the bright side, I'm definitely taking this slowly, which I guess was the goal, and I'll update you more tomorrow when I probably finish Falling in Love with Hominids. See y'all later. Okay, so I finished Nalo Hopkinson's Falling in Love with Hominids, and I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars. That's what my average rating is. I'm not going to go into every story here, but if you are interested in seeing my responses to each one, I sort of give a short review on Goodreads of every single story, breaking it down. Although the more responses, basically these responses, so they're not really fully thought out reviews, so if you haven't read the stories, the commentary might not mean much to you, but it's there if you're interested. Big picture, I feel like this really highlights a range of skill on the part of Nalo Hopkinson, on her ability to delve into such a range of different sort of genres, fantastical genres, or speculative fiction genres, and I was really impressed in that sense. I was also very happy with how queer this book was. It was unapologetically queer. The characters were there, they were queer, they were very open about it. It was very much prevalent in the story, but it wasn't about them being queer. I don't think there was a single story that was about queerness, that was about being gay or being somehow on the queer spectrum. It just was, and I loved it for that. My biggest concern here for me is that I guess there's a limit on what I can take when it comes to short fiction, and she has 18 stories in here. It's fairly short, so some of these stories are extremely short, like some are only like a page or two long, and it may just be a personal preference when it comes to like needing more from a story, because a lot of these, like, they'll really be intriguing concepts and even they get me so close to being a perfect story, but to me just they're missing something to reach that sort of perfection mark. And I do think it's largely just because it's just does so little with the world that she builds. But there are times though that she's able to build a world so fully in a way that just feels, I can see it so clearly, and I wish she did more with it, but I'm also still impressed that she could do that. It makes me more excited to read her full-length novels where I can see her dive deeply into a world, and I'm excited to do that. I mean, even the ones that were not as fleshed out as I would have liked them to be, they were still really fun and intriguing stories. And some of these, I think my favorite ones in here are probably the really dark ones. Sorry, to close it off, I think there were 3 or 4 5-star reads in here. The rest were either 4.5, 4. My lowest rating was 3-star. And my favorite ones, they were all really dark. There was one, Old Habits, which is about basically these people who are in their afterlife in a mall. I liked it because it presented a really unique world, kind of dark. It satisfied what I would have wanted from a story in a lot of ways, while also being a complete narrative. Another one was called Blushing, which is about this wife and this husband. I believe they were husband and wife. I may have gotten the genders wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was one of the few cases where you had a straight couple. But she was mad because they bought this new house, and the husband wants this room to be kept from her. It's all his. She can never go in there. And then it sort of progresses, and it's just like the story went 360 in tone so quickly. And boy, did I love it. I loved it so much. I want a story like that one. I don't want to say exactly what the genre is, but I want that kind of genre from Netta Hopkinson because I think she could do it such justice. And then there was one in here, Left Foot, Right Shoe, or something like that. And it was about a young woman who lost her sister in a car accident. And it is sort of her going through these motions of reliving it, or constantly reminding herself or fixating on this accident and her inability to move on. And there were also some stuff in here that has to do with other things of loss of life, and I really liked it for just a multitude of reasons. It was just so well executed, and it was so emotional. I think this was the closest I came to crying in the entire thing. Just the loss of the sister and the loss of other things. It also reminded me of one of the short stories in the Friday Black short story collection. There was one story in there about loss. I don't want to specify exactly, I don't want to spoil it, but it was about loss, and about a particular type of loss, and looks at it in a really weird, fantastical, and eerie, but uncomfortable, but also almost, I guess, more real way. What she does is she takes something that for a lot of people, if you haven't experienced it like myself, it's I think it can be difficult to recognize or to relate, and she personifies this pain in such a way that I think it was really profound and moving. Speaking to someone who hasn't had to go through this, either losing a sister or the other thing that's in the story, but I did love it for that. I think there was another one here, I don't remember. There were several 4.5 stars as well, but I won't go into all of them. But all I'll say is that I'm very happy with this collection. It isn't a 5-star for me, but it's a solid collection. I'm very happy that I read it. There are some short stories in here that I might, or probably will, end up going back to, try to play the audiobook version for my family occasionally. I will say that the last couple stories of this book were not that satisfying for me. There was one really long story that was from a collection, like Fairy Realm. I was really excited going to that. It's probably the most disappointing because I expected it to be more. It felt kind of lackluster. It was a fully fleshed out world, but to me, for it being set in a fairy realm or a sort of fairy tangential realm, I was expecting it to do more with its concept, and so it ended up feeling very mundane. But that was kind of a lackluster way of ending it, but overall it's still a solid collection fully through, and I'm happy that I read it. I'm also, again, excited. Makes me excited to read her longer books. Last night before bed I also reread Two Moons, the first story of Two Moons, I mean, and I think I was able to connect to it a lot more because I realized that when I narrated to my sister, I was more focused on how to pronounce words than what I was actually reading, which is I wasn't really processing the words so much as processing how I was saying them. And I was able to connect a lot or recognize things a lot more clearly. Again, this is like just a few pages long, but I thought it was a really impactful story. It was mythological, and it was sort of having to do with identity. I think it had to do with identity. Obviously, I'm speaking as someone who's trying to understand this experience, understand what's being said, and I don't think it's necessarily being written for me, but I still find it a really enlightening experience trying to understand what the message is trying to get across. And I thought it was very beautiful and makes me really excited to continue reading it. It was a really, really strong start. but it's now Monday evening and I haven't really read much more of this or the other anthology, but I'm not giving up yet. I just did a lot of my calendar today and it looks like this is probably going to go up in late January anyway, so we have time to finish this off. But like I said, I don't want it to go over because my TBR, but if I have to, I will. But that's where I'm at for now. Things are moving along, things are going well. I'll catch you later. Okay, so it is now Tuesday morning of the 29th. I am really gonna start cracking down because if I really want to finish all of these, I need to hurry up. I didn't read any more of this yesterday. I don't know why. My goal is to get through as much of this today as I can, which would hopefully then leave the 30th for this, and then leave me free to do stuff on the 31st. We'll see if that goes anywhere, but I need to push through. Let's see what I do last night. I did read the next book, the next short story in this, and I was like, this is good. I want to keep going, but I was super tired because I waited till I was like in the dead of night. It was like 3 a.m. in the morning. So I'm just gonna start, and hopefully, like, the hardest part is getting started. This is why I don't read physically. It's just hard for me to sit down and put my attention in this sort of focused thing and just this. It's so hard. It's really hard, and I want to do it. And this is why it's a good motivation for this kind of vlog. It gets me to experience a different kind of reading that I'm used to, as opposed to, just doing mindless tasks when I listen to an audiobook. It's easier to like process the information that way for me. But we're gonna do this. I'm just gonna go ahead and start reading. I know the lighting here is probably terrible, but I like it for reading because it's behind me, so you're gonna have to deal with that. Okay, continue playing. I swear I am the embodiment of slow reading when it comes to me reading with my eyes instead of my ears. I am not even halfway. It's like after 10. I'm going to be reading at least 25 more pages tonight. At least that's what I'm going to try and do before I go to sleep. There's a reason I don't read physically. It's just so hard to focus. I made it through a good section of the first part of the book, and then I ate lunch, and then I tried to read again, and my mind, it just would not stick. It kept going off in different directions, and it was impossible. And I'm finally back here on the verge of sleep, and I'm able to focus again. I don't know what's wrong with me. I wish I knew. But I wasn't going to update you again tonight because I don't want to update you on every story, but they're just so damn good. I wanted to talk about Harvest because this week that I'm filming this, or trying to close out this vlog, is the Kwanzaa-a-thon hosted by and Jerry from ONYX Pages, the person I'm doing this video about. And I felt like I should acknowledge that, and I was thinking about how to incorporate that into this vlog, because I wanted to at least mention it in some books, or some different suggestions for books that will satisfy the different prompts, or the different words or phrases that signify every day. And today is cooperative operation, or cooperative, I don't remember the word. I think it's operation, or basically like supporting one another in the Black community. And Jerry in her live today talked about it, like supporting Black businesses was a big conversation there. And she talked about how it's hard to find a good example for this, and I thought this story that I just read, Harvest, might be a good representation of this, which is about this young woman who basically has her own harvest. She grows her own food, and she supplies it to the animals and people in her area. Like, they come to her for supplies. She's the one who gives to her community, and it's sort of this feedback loop. And as it turns out, she is also giving to a goddess, and the goddess is giving to her. So it's this sort of feedback loop of giving and getting. I'm not sure if it's a perfect fit here, but I couldn't help but think of it, considering today is the day about cooperative operation. I really love these stories so much. I'm not sure if I said this already, but essentially it is the embodiment of the metaphysical and the sort of supernatural and mythological in a way that really works for me. As someone who is a naturalist and a scientist who does not believe in the mythological, I love how this book so expertly sort of brings it to life. It takes the real world and sort of subverts it in a way that you would expect given these sort of fantastical mythological worlds. It's just so good. I am almost halfway, and it is so far a perfect collection. I am a little anxious just because, you know, you keep reading. It's like, is this going to be the story that does it? It's like every time I make it to a new story, it's like my expectations for it to fail is a little bit higher, but also a little bit lower because it's proving itself to be so strong. I don't think I've ever read a short story collection that has been perfect all the way through, and I'm just so excited to be making it through this. And that's part of the reason I want to finish this before the year is out, because I want to be able to talk about it in my year wrap up. But that's where I'm at for now. No more progress in the other books. If I can finish this tomorrow, I think I have a chance at finishing the other anthology or the other short story collection, but I guess we'll see if that happens. Whatever happens, I'll make sure I read it by the time this goes up, which is looking like mid-January, which I guess you wouldn't know that because you're watching it. Okay, so I finished this book, 2 Moons, Stories by Crystal A. Smith. I finished it off today. I actually read some of it again to my sister, this time taking more care to appreciate what I was reading while I read it. Right now we're looking at 10 o'clock. I took multiple naps today because I was up super late last night, but this gets at least what I felt. 5 stars, full for sure. Absolutely. This is the closest a short story collection has ever gotten to being perfect for me. I'm a little disappointed only because it was so close to being utter perfection in my eyes. And the only reason it wasn't was just because the second to last story wasn't absolutely perfect for me. And that's unfortunate, but I want to make it clear that with the commentary I'm about to give in a second about that story does not change the fact that this collection will probably be in my top 10 favorites of the year. It's one of my favorites of all time, and I cannot wait to reread it. This was so beautiful, so powerful. What I was amazed by was how much I loved the sort of happy side to this, because usually I'm a fan of really dark things, and this is fundamentally a hopeful book. There were some dark sides of the stories. There's always some positive outlook in the end, and it always made me feel so good on the inside. The biggest thing about this was that it was both creative coupled with some emotional payoff in the end, in a way that really made it go from just being 4 or 4.5 to being a full 5 stars every time, almost every time. The only time that didn't happen was in the second to last story. I think it was Cosmic or Cosmos, and it was the sort of follow-up story to the titular story of the collection, 2 Moons. I was really liking it at first, and honestly, I still liked it. Let me be very clear. It was a solid story. I really liked it. What it lacked, I think, was the emotional connection that I felt all the other stories in the end. I did not feel that for its characters, and I think part of that is because all of these stories, they sort of are more than just the fantastical. They're the real world. There's someone in the real world with a meshing or overlaying of fantastical, mythological side to it. The second to last story, what we have purely the mythological or fantastical side. We're delving entirely into this world that she created for this 2 Moon story, and we're sort of completely disconnected from our sort of mortal realm, our mortal selves in a sense. And because of that, we are dependent entirely on the feelings and the motivations of this sort of cosmic entity. And honestly, it felt kind of like It's a Wonderful Life to me in these sort of celestial beings. As a planetary scientist, I loved it. I loved the world building of it all. But in the end, the character motivations, they all felt sort of, I don't know if one-dimensional is the right direction, but it seems like the easiest way to describe it. It felt sort of simplistic, sort of childish. And while I don't mind that big picture, I hated it because without the sort of mundane characters, we lack that sort of dynamic range that this other stories had. I'm not sure if that's a fair assessment. That's just how I feel about it. And to be clear, that story is it's easily 4, maybe even 4.5 stars. It just, in the end, I wasn't able to connect to it emotionally. I also felt like there was a little tiny bit of it that was sort of not logically consistent in the world building, but it was still fantastic. I loved exploring that world. I just hate that I couldn't connect to our titular character of that story in the same way I did the other characters. But nevertheless, this is still going to be a 5-star collection. You don't not get to be 5 stars because one story happens to be slightly below 5 stars. This is truly the closest to perfection I've ever seen in a short story collection. I said it once and I'll say it again. And I'm so happy that I got this in before the end of the year. Now, because it's 10 p.m. and I have not started Love Beyond Space and Time, I don't think I'm going to finish this before the new year. And I'm not going to try, I think. I'm going to let myself fester a bit and sort of focus on finishing other audiobooks as well as The Deep, which is only going to take 2 hours. I don't think that's going to be a problem. But I don't want to rush through this tomorrow, and I also want to be able to film my December wrap-up tomorrow before I go to sleep. And this would probably take me all day to read if I managed to finish it then. I'm just going to give myself some time. Of course, that is fine because this isn't going up tomorrow anyways. But I'm excited to see what we get from this collection nevertheless. I am really excited to get to this because while Nalo Hopkinson's book was not perfect, technically it was not on Jerry's top books of the last 2 years or whatever. I'm not sure if she would consider it on par with Two Moons or this one, but if this is on par with Two Moons, which was in the same list, like I think second to neck, and if it's anything close to that, I think it's going to be a fantastic collection. I'm really excited to get to it. If it's not obvious, I love this sort of magical realism, sort of fantastical mythological side of these stories mixed with sort of our sort of human characters, and the way in which we can sort of dig into the emotional side of our characters, using it as a way to sort of understand them a bit better. Before I close up this segment, I want to clarify one thing I said earlier in the vlog about this book, which was that I loved it for how it was portraying the mythological and fantastical and how it's exactly as I would suspect. And I want to clarify that when I say it's exactly what I suspect, what I mean is you would suspect if these mythological things were real, a lot of the world's logic and sort of laws would sort of be circumvented, meaning it would become unpredictable. So it is what I expect by being unexpectable. And by which I mean it's exactly what I expect by being not what I expect. I know that seems like a bad way of phrasing it, and it absolutely is, but that's what I meant when I was saying it's exactly what I would expect, in the sense that the world stops making sense, which it should, right, if these things are real. I mean, there's some rules to it, but fundamentally, these sort of mythological worlds are much more whimsy and free to sort of bend what it is we understand as reality. And I love it for that. That's one reason why I love these stories, was for how it did it and the way it did it. And not just that it did it, but that it was able to, here I am just going back to these stories, that it was able to make me connect to our characters in such a profound way. There's a few reviewers of this book that I noticed that would sort of accuse this book of being like I accused Nalo Hopkinson's book, which is that I thought the Hominids book had a lot of short stories that introduced really interesting ideas without any real payoff, and there are people who suggest this was the same thing here. I don't think that's the case. Every single story, we get these seemingly normal situations that then get this weird twist to it, and there's always some sort of arc, some sort of payoff on why it is we're being introduced to this fantastical stuff, to these characters. I am curious if that's the case of the book is more like that, or is it because I read this with my eyes instead of listening to it? Because as much as I would like to believe that consuming a book visually versus auditorily is the same thing, it really isn't. And I can't help but wonder if maybe I just didn't appreciate the stories as much of Nalo Hopkinson's book because of the fact that I listened to it. I don't think so. I've given reasons why I think this one sort of stands out above that one, and that's why I feel like these shine where the other stories were just really interesting. And we'll catch up to you tomorrow, but for now I think I'm going to take a little break from this sort of heavy reading, give myself some light reading to sort of relax, sort of fester on what I've read up to now. Again, I'm loving this so much. This is probably by far the best vlog for this series that I've done yet. That book, it is the best book I've read in this series, and I'm not sure I would have read it otherwise, honestly. I bought these two books specifically for this vlog. Otherwise, I might have picked more mainstream books that are on audio. And so this was the perfect motivation, not just to get me to pick up these books, but to push myself to read physically with my eyes and sort of just appreciate that experience and the difference it is between my normal way of listening. But I'm rambling. There's just so much I'd love to say about this. This is such a great experience. I'll catch y'all again later.
So think like kind of that vibe, and he meets a woman.
Welcome to the new year. It is now January 2nd. I didn't read anything on January 1st, and I also didn't finish this on New Year's Eve. I was going to. I went and I participated, and since I watched and chatted with the panel on Ashley at Bookish Realms channel for the New Year's. That was actually a lot of fun. I was going to, get off of there and finish this book if they weren't going to do more reading sprints, which I figured they wouldn't because I had like 2 hours left in the book. But I ultimately decided not to do that for a couple reasons. One, I figured it wasn't worth ruining the New Year's celebration just so I could say I finished the book in the end of the year, but also because the book, this whole goal is not to force myself to speed read to anything. Like, sure, I'm not going at super fast speeds, but I still think I should give myself the space to pace myself and listen to this when I'm in the mood to listen to it, pause when I need to, and stop. So I decided to stop, and we're here now. I'm going to try and finish this today, but again, I'm not going to force myself. If I feel like I want to stop, I'll switch to a different book. I am worried this might get me behind on my reading this month, but it's okay. It's not the end of the world, but this is where we're at so far. And the book itself is really interesting. I think it helps that I've heard different commentary about it leading up to it. Yesterday was the last day of the Kwanzaa Reflectathon, and Jerry and the others actually spoke about the book, The Deep, during that as an example of several of the different qualities of the Kwanzaa themes, and I thought that was really interesting. I'll of course link below, assuming the playlist of that, or at least the different videos in that, for you to check those out. They're really fascinating conversations, and so I'm glad that they shared that experience. That is basically where I'm at right now. Still trying to finish this out. I'll get back to you
later.
Didn't you know the ocean grants wishes? Asked Yetu. It wasn't really that simple, of course. Yetu didn't believe the sea was sentient, but it was where life began. It was where the life of the Rajanru began. And reaching backward, the life of the two legs, too. So that phrase, or piece of the passage, comes in the last section of the book right before it ends. And I hope you all don't get mad viewing this, because I don't think it's really a spoiler. I say it because I think it is a powerful passage that really encompasses what this book is partially about. Because I like how it encompasses the magic of the ocean, the magic that is yet also not magic. Like, in a lot of ways, this feels like a fantasy book, but it could in some ways be portrayed or interpreted as science fiction. I don't think I'm saying this very well, but I just thought it was a beautiful way of sort of portraying how the origin of life began. Because in a lot of ways, chemistry and the chemistry of life that was there in the ocean was almost magical in a lot of ways. And I liked that brought to life the ocean, while also sort of keeping it grounded in a almost naturalist approach of how the deep may have come about. I finished The Deep by River Solomon et al., and I really liked this book. It was really good. I particularly liked the ending. Kind of went the way of Two Moons in the sense that there was some love aspects in the story, and I think I need to seek out more stories that revolve around sort of a relationship, especially queer relationships, because I'm finding, at least in this vlog, that I'm really connecting them in a lot of ways. I cannot wait to read this book eventually, because I think there's a lot to be said in this book, and such a powerful conversation. All in all, I think it's a 5-star book. It connects to me in the way that I want a 5-star book to do, while also saying something that really makes me think, to really elevate it even further, while also just being a solid, engaging book. I may just be going off the high of having freshly read this, but I really liked it. I think I'm gonna give it 5 stars for being a great book. I don't really have much more to say about this book. I feel like there are better discussions out there about this book and about what it's saying by All Voices reviewers. In a lot of ways, I feel like a lot of my thoughts, a lot of what I'm thinking about this is really just sort of thinking about what I've heard other people discuss when it comes to this book, and about how it talks about history and the nature of remembering your past. This book is largely about the importance of remembering your history, but also how painful that can be. And it has a question of, like, what is the responsibility of any one individual and of the community as a whole. And there was one part of this book that really uses this idea that if we do not remember our history, I say we, if people forget their history, if they let their history fade, we'll inevitably lose part of ourselves. I don't feel like I'm articulating my words very clearly, and I also don't want to spoil the book. I'll just say that I really like this book, and it was just very thought-provoking and really well developed. I love the sci-fi fantasy side of it as well. It is everything that I'm looking for in a solid science fiction book, and I was not disappointed at all. I appreciate the efforts of River Solomon et al. Of putting this together, so I have the opportunity to sort of glimpse and to try and empathize in this story and in this process and in the nature of having to remember the pain and the past, and also reflect on personal responsibility of my ancestors as well as the continued harm that gets done by people like me. I'm not completely satisfied with how I'm articulating myself here, but I'm trying to be as open and honest here as possible. Now all we have left is one book. Love Beyond Space and Time, an Indigenous sci-fi LGBT anthology. I will start this tomorrow, probably. I'm going to start tonight, and I will update you as we go. I'll hopefully finish this soon. The goal is to give y'all this in a week's time. And if you do, yay, it worked. But I have hopes for this. I find it hard to believe that it could really meet Two Moons. Even The Deep, I loved in a lot of ways, but I'm not sure I connected to it in the same way that I felt like I connected with a lot of the personal aspects of Two Moons. But we'll see if this does. But then again, Two Moons was completely unexpected, so we'll see if this works for me as well as Two Moons did, because I'm looking for some queer rep that I can really appreciate. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. So when was the last time I updated you all? Was it a week ago? It might have been more. It is January 9th, and I have finally started Love Beyond Space and Time, an Indigenous LGBT sci-fi anthology. This month has, I don't know, I just haven't wanted to pick up this book. I guess I didn't think about the fact that when I tried reading this one and Two Moons back to back, it's more than just the fact that I'm a slow reader when it comes to reading with my eyes. I'm also sort of easily fatigued in that aspect, so I think I wanted a break. So I ended up just listening to audiobooks outside of this video. I had hoped to get through this before Friday to be able to put this up this Friday, this January, but I just haven't been able to read. And I tried reading more today, and I really struggled. I've got through the first essays of this, which has me really intrigued for the rest. That said, school's back now, and while I don't have classes, I do have research responsibilities and deadlines and things coming up. So I am all over the place, and I can't really make any commitments. I have hopes, but I also have other responsibilities. I will say I was a little disconcerted with the first few first few essays, because I knew the first one was like an intro essay, and I realized the second one was an essay as well, like an intro segment. Then the third essay was really long, and I did not realize that it was an essay. It's basically an essay which outlines, it tells some historical context to sort of build us to this set of anthologies, and I felt it was going to be a fictitious story told in the structure of like a historical narrative that was like being recounted. I finally realized there was a reference. I went in the back of it and there was a reference list, so clearly this was an actual thing that happened. A little slow to pick it up, but to be fair, I don't think it was clearly outlined. Like it says whenever editor here, but it doesn't say that these other two people are also editors or contributors to it, and like they're not listed in the back. When we look at the authors, they are listed in the table of contents, but again, it doesn't say that it is a essay. So I was a little bit annoyed with that. With that said, I thought they were both actually, they're all really good introductions to this, particularly the third essay, which talks about the role of Indigenous, queer, and two-spirited people in Indigenous communities, and I think it works really well as a precursor. There was one quote in here in particular, as you can see, I've already sort of started tagging some stuff that I thought was relevant not only to this, but to, I think, underrepresented voices in general. They give us a way of seeing reality beyond that, which we have inherited to see, and ways of seeing beyond what we think we see. That is one of the big reasons, I think, to branch out, not only because there's a lot of great work out there to enjoy, that you're depriving yourself of if you're not reading diversely, but also just because of the fact that there's more to the world than what you think you see, more than what I think I see. Obviously, I'm talking about myself in a third person, but I think that really encapsulates my feelings when it comes to trying to branch out of my comfort zone when it comes to picking up books. So that's where I'm at. Hopefully there's not much more left of this, but I'm slowly itching through this, and I'm reading when I can. I will catch y'all later. We did it. We finally finished. Today is January 30th. I definitely embodied in Jerry's idea of slow reading, I think, as I certainly took my time with this vlog, a lot longer than I intended. But I have a lot to say. Okay, I guess we should just start by talking about my thoughts of this book, right? Before I get into a wrap up about how this all went. So, as you can see, I decided to start annotating everything. Since the last time we talked, it's been quite a while. I just wasn't in the mood to read. Honestly, there's something about reading physically and slowly that is extremely taxing. I don't know why. It takes a lot of willpower to sit down and sort of stay focused. I just kept doing other things instead. And part of me thinks that maybe I should consider audio slow reading, basically reading physically and audibly to help me get into it. That said, as I got into this later portion, which I basically did the last couple days, the last half of this book, I decided to start annotating, like more directly, like highlighting and putting in little tabs to help me stay engaged with the story. Even then it was tough sometimes. The last maybe third or fourth of this book, I actually stood up and walked around my room while I read it to help me from like getting distracted by other things, and it actually worked pretty well. Now, first thing I'll say is, let's see, I have a range of different colors here. Generally, we have yellow and green, because I didn't always have yellow on hand, to indicate general things relevant to the story that I wanted to be able to quickly look to if I wanted to remember what the story was about. But we have pink for things that I think are socially poignant or thematically relevant aspects of the story that I want to be able to refer to. And we have this one little blue tab, which I refer to as the one thing that had a serious emotional impact on me, which I'll touch on in a second. I actually have I think one orange in here as well, which is a editing error. They made a mistake, but it was just one time. So I will say that this wasn't as great as Two Moons, which is fine. I mean, it's rare for a collection, short story or anthology otherwise, to be perfect. And that's what made this so great, I think. But this was still a solid collection. There were some really great stories in here. And the ones that I didn't necessarily connect to were, like, they didn't overwhelm everything. I think it did contribute in part to my sort of sluggishness to get to this, a mix of it being not on audio with it just being stories that weren't as hitting as hard as some of the others. But I think there were enough in here to make it a solid collection. So if I had to give a number, I'd probably say 4 stars. But I think it's also worth mentioning that obviously as a white cis man who may be queer but still white cis man, it clearly isn't necessarily being written for me. But I do think there was a lot to take away from here regardless, and even if I feel like I missed more than what I got from here, I still feel like the effort is necessary to begin to connect. The fact that I didn't always connect with the story says more about my own, I guess, limitations, I think, in the story itself at times. But I thought they were a solid collection, a mix of sci-fi and fantasy, maybe some magical realism, and a lot of just queer amazingness. And I did love the collection, and I think the really good ones made it really stand out. Also, this cover, I did an Instagram picture of this, and I couldn't help but love the contrast, especially when I did the picture. I did it in a contrast with the sky, just the perfect mesh of the blue and the pinks and the purples and the greens. It looks so beautiful. So let's talk about, first off, this blue tab, the one tab that I felt like I needed to be distinctly different because it hit me emotionally hard. And it's really quite, I think it's very personal why it hit me this hard. So in the context of the story, we have a world where basically nanobites or nanites have been able to be used to keep people young, which honestly seems like the most realistic way of like curing cancer, things like that. I think this might have been similar to what you see inside. This is our character talking in respective to her parents. Mom and Dad were born before nanite revolution, when itty-bitty wonder bites surged through our bodies to elongate telomeres, degrade cancers, repair DNA, and accelerate healing. In other words, my parents aged and died. And I struggle constantly. There was a part of the problem of trying to physically read, or even read anything, even if it's audibly, that has to do with thinking about the concept of long-term life and the near and the distant future. It forces me to think about the inevitability of some things, such as death of my parents. One of the many things that I fear about getting older, like getting aged, I'm not as concerned about as just this idea of losing things, losing those closest to me. And this one aspect, it hit hard. And honestly, I'm not going to go too much into it just because part of me thinks I should talk to someone. Like particularly, this is one area that I feel like I'm really sensitive about, maybe too sensitive about. But even big picture, just ignoring this aspect to confront the idea that parents die, you move on. Even if you didn't live forever or indefinitely, it's still really hard. But let's think about it in the context of living forever, living on. This is an example of like how it's sort of really provocative ideas. And like, if you could live on, would you do it? And if you could, for how long? There are books that deal with this. I think the one that comes to mind is the Gilda Stories by Joel Gomez, obviously, is the big one there. Our central character at the beginning of the novel, whose name is Gilda, she passes on her name to her to the person she sired. And part of it is her ready to sort of leave life after living this long life. And personally, in the context of my life, I think about what I would want to do here. It's hard to think about if I really would be able to do that. When I was younger, I used to dream of, in the future, we'll have like better aging, like we'll be able to live longer. So that I'm hoping to be able to live to my 120s, 130s. Like that was my ideal. And now Like, first off, I'm not sure if that's even realistic at all. Like, I honestly don't think it is realistic that we're going to be that much advanced. It was a dream that I had. But even if I could, like, the idea of, like, an ideal world, my parents lived till I'm 60. That means they'll be like 90, which is a very liberal estimation. And then I lived to be 90, which again is a liberal estimation, but that's still a third of my life without my parents. And that's just one example of like this idea of having to live on and make a new life and this new aspect of life. And it's terrifying, just that one period of time. And like part of this is coming from my grandmother dying in August, and how I've lived 30 years with her in my life, and I lived to be 90. That's the third of my life, and she's here. And I now, if I'm lucky, I know I'm looking at this the wrong way, but if I'm lucky, I have more of my life to live, to look forward to without her than with her. And that kind of thought is just so depressing. I don't know, that had a huge impact on me, and I struggle with that kind of idea. I think there were some quotes I want to make note of, like were just like fun for me. There was one that I really liked, talking about Peter Pan. I always thought that Peter Pan was gay because of his tights. What was so horrible about Victorian England that Pan had to retreat into a fantasy, a world of make-believe, one where he would never grow up or face his latent homosexuality. Wendy, Tiger Lily, Tink, even the bloody mermaids, they all wanted him bad. But Pan, he only had eyes for his lost boys. I thought that was fun. That was a cute quote. Honestly, that was the only quote I think I thought was just like really something I wanted to mention because it was fun. Overall, solid collection, very thought-provoking. Like that one quote about my parents, like that was just one example of how this kind of narrative, why I love science fiction and fantasy, it really makes you think in very uncomfortable ways. And I know that one was very personal. There were other ways in which I had to think. Like, there was a lot of two-spirit and trans type conversations and perspectives in here, and I really liked that. Now obviously as a cis person, I can't necessarily speak to how well it represents the trans experience, but I thought it was a beautiful insight into that perspective from some of these authors. So that was another reason why I really liked it. Particularly Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit is something that I think I only just recently came to understand, become familiar with rather, like in the last year or so. And so this, I think, was a great introduction to like a really personalized perspective, or some personalized perspectives on what it means to be Two-Spirit, and I think that was great in that aspect as well. So solid collection. I think I'm going to give it 4 stars, but still higher than Nell Hopkinson's Falling in Love with Hominids. Anyway, did I mention I finished the deep? I'm pretty sure we talked about this. Everything there is to say about this. This was a fantastic story, and I really want to read it again. But it was just amazing imagery here, and there's a love aspect to it that I really liked. That's one of my favorite things I think we realized. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I love the love in here. Obviously, I love the love in here, but like there's a love aspect twisted with, intertwined with this fundamental conversation about history and identity and responsibility, as well as what it means to remember and also the burden of that remembering. But fundamentally, I think the conversation here that needs to be had, that is to be had around this, is better received, or better seen, or better had by people of color, by black readers, that is to say. Now, big picture, I think maybe I overdid myself trying to read 2 books physically in 1 month. Like, sure, like part of it is that I did love this more than this, so there were certain parts of this that I think made it more difficult for me to stay focused with, but also just the nature of my attention span and my ability to stay focused on a story that is not on audio is really difficult. But I will say that it's definitely taught me some approaches on how to fix that and on what to do. Like, I feel like despite the fact that this did not resonate with me as much as this, I had so much more I could talk about with this because of the fact that I made a point to stop and think about it. I treated this almost like I do like a paper, where I don't always know what I'm supposed to be pulling from it. So instead, I do my best to think, does this seem relevant? Let me make a note of it and then annotate that. Like, say, this is something you might want to think about, or at least highlight to, like, so it sticks out in your mind. If you want to, you can return to it. And that's what I think made this experience distinctly different from this one, because this one I loved, but I don't think I did enough to really highlight the aspects that stood out so I could easily return to these pieces that I just marinate in the joy of it. So overall, it was a great experience. My first time trying a vlog that spans over the course of a long period of time, and I think that also played into why it took so long, but it's fine. Like, the goal was to take my time, and I did. I'm happy I did this. Obviously, if you haven't checked Jerry's page out before, clearly you should. She is phenomenal. She has such amazing recs. like recommendations that is, but the conversations she has are so thought-provoking and so intentional that it really makes her stand out from, I think, a lot of booktubers. She isn't here for the superficial discussion of, I read this book, this is this, this is this, this is this. It's about a targeted reason for reading a book and trying to figure out what we can take from that and sort of use it to change ourselves. Maybe I'm projecting a bit because I can't help it. They can think back to Octavia Butler's Parable series, which I think I talked about it here. It may have been a different video, but the idea of change and God is change. Fundamentally, what we consume changes us. Like things we expose ourselves to changes us. Obviously, there's only so much control we have there, but reading is one area, one way of controlling what we expose ourselves to and the type of change that we facilitate amongst ourselves. I know that's kind of hand-wavy, but I think it's a good point. I think it's still true regardless. So that's that. I don't know how long this vlog is going to be. I don't know how much bee footage I'm going to include because I tried to record it, but I'm not sure if that's really conducive to this sort of long-term vlog. But I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if you think you might now. If you've kept up with my channel, this was like a top book of last year, so phenomenal, amazing. Thanks so much for watching. This was an amazing experience, and as always, stay safe. Bye, y'all.